Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Pentecost with APA Virginia staff. Thank you for joining us for a monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. And while we are waiting for everyone to get in the room here, I will just talk briefly about our annual conference that's coming up now that we're through the National Planning Conference, which was record-setting attendance. We hope that carries over into our Hampton Conference this year. And we have a lot of exciting things planned. If you haven't checked out mobile tours, we have many different boat tours if you want to get out on the water, and you can earn CM credit for some of them. There's a canoe trip that should be very fun if you want to get out and see Hampton's history, old Hampton housing. There's just a little something for everyone. And we have mobile tours on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday this year, which is new. We're trying a couple other new things this year, like having our awards ceremony during lunch on Tuesday this year, which is super exciting. Let's see, something else that we're trying new this year is offering multiple sessions to get legal credit. So if the legislative update just doesn't do it for you, we have a few other sessions this year to give you some options. And we reorganized our schedule a little bit to be different than in past years, trying to shake things up a little bit. So if you haven't been to the conference in a few years, maybe this is your year. And registration is open, and we have early bird rates through June 30th. So you make sure to take advantage of that while you can. You can register at apavirginia.com. This is the website here that you're seeing. And if you have any questions, you can contact us through the website. You can email someone on the board. You can contact us through social media. We hope to see you there this summer. And for those of you who just signed on, thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. Thank you for those who share this with colleagues and help spread the word about our series. It's been really great to see it grow. And today, I think we'll have our own record-setting attendance for this webinar. These webinars are the fourth Monday of each month from noon to 1 and cover many different topics in the planning field. Be on the lookout for a follow-up email to this webinar, and that will have the CM credit info and info on contacting our presenter today. We will post this webinar to our YouTube page within 24 hours, and something that's new is most of our webinars are now available on demand. So you can actually go watch past webinars and get a CM credit now. And if you go to our YouTube channel and click on the video and look in the comment section, you'll see the info for that. So it's not the CM info from when it aired, but it has totally different CM info on demand. And this one will be available on demand as well at some point this week. So if you are watching this recording, or if you know of someone who missed it, tell them that no fear, they can still get a CM credit. And this is a great new professional development opportunity for APA members. If you have any questions, contact Andrew Hopewell, our PDO, our Professional Development Officer, with any questions. Next month's webinar will be on May 20th. We're moving it up a week because of Memorial Day. So Monday, May 20th, we'll have Parker Sloan of Cypress Creek Renewables. Today, I'm excited to host Jonathan Knopf with Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia. Jonathan is the Senior Associate for Research and Programs at HD Advisors, providing data collection and analysis for affordable housing nonprofits across Virginia. He specializes in using GIS to create maps that help tell the story of housing needs throughout the state. His research covers inclusionary zoning, real estate market analysis for community land trusts, land banking, and housing barriers in Virginia's manufactured home communities. Jonathan has a master's in urban and regional planning from Virginia Commonwealth University, where he also teaches an undergraduate Introduction to Urban Planning course. So before I hand it over, one last thing, we'll take questions as we go along, which is different than usual. So go ahead and type them in the questions box, and we will take a few minutes here and there to get to them. And also be on the lookout because we have a couple polls here during this webinar today. So it'll be a little bit interactive, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm assuming everybody can hear me now and can see my screen, but if you can't, please go ahead and type in the chat or let Sarah know, but I will go ahead and start. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is manufactured home communities, because I think they are very interesting. I think the challenges involved with these neighborhoods and communities and this type of housing are immense, but as we'll talk about, there's a lot of good work being done across Virginia and across the country to really rethink these communities and these neighborhoods for the 21st century. So I have the privilege of acting as a supporting consultant for the Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia, which is a relatively new nonprofit. I'll talk a little bit about the background of it, but some of you who are listening may have heard me wearing my Housing Virginia hat or my Maggie Walker CLT hat. So you will definitely see me if you're at the APA conference this summer talking about housing and resiliency and the intersection of those two topics. I'll be wearing my Housing Virginia hat there, but today I'm wearing my manufactured home hat, which is one of my favorite ones to wear. So let's go ahead and get started here. So Sarah, let's go ahead and pull up the pop quiz that we have. Don't worry, folks, it's not too hard. It's just a simple question that we would like to have in order to kind of gauge your thoughts on manufactured housing and mobile home communities right now, because they can be controversial. People do have strong feelings about them, and I just want to see where folks are. If you think that these are an asset or a liability to your community, maybe you don't really have any near you and you really haven't thought about any. So we'll let you give us your initial thoughts here, and we'll see what folks think. All right, so over half of you think that these are a liability, and that's understandable. These mobile home parks are generally seen as obsolete. Many localities, at least in the past or recent past, have actively tried to get rid of them. Many of them are in poor condition. But as we'll learn about today, the picture's a little bit more complicated. And there are many examples out there of mobile home communities, manufactured home communities that are very strong and vibrant. But they're not too common. And there are ways, thankfully, to create those, but there's a lot of policy barriers and other challenges in the way that we'll talk about. So to that end, what generally comes to folks' minds when you hear mobile home park or trailer park? If you just go ask, Joe Citizen on the street what he thinks about a mobile home park, he may imagine something like this. A redneck paradise, or a hodgepodge of old trailers and units full of trash and people who are poor and have very poor living conditions, and nobody really has a good impression generally of a mobile home park. Sometimes mobile home parks are seen as literally being on the wrong side of the tracks. They are often in parts of communities that aren't very attractive, aren't well connected, and they're often situated next to other undesirable land uses. In the city of Richmond here, we have mobile home parks that are next to landfills, that are next to junkyards, next to all sorts of things that generally folks don't want to live next to. Sometimes it's more cultural, and people may be reminded of shows like Trailer Park Boys or other media depictions that reinforce these cultural stereotypes that we have about this type of housing and who lives in it. And these things, unfortunately, build on one another, and we today, even in the affordable housing community, have many stereotypes which are, for the most part, unfounded. And we'll talk about some of the research that we've done that busts some of these myths. The reality, on the other hand, is that parks kind of look something like this generally. This is Glen Meadows in Caroline County. It's pretty suburban, surrounded by trees. Most folks are low to moderate income, lots of long-term residents. It's a pretty stable, it's not a very attractive, but it's a pretty stable, good community that provides affordable housing in a place where housing is not super affordable. Sometimes mobile home parks look really good. This is Sedgefield Mobile Home Park in Hanover County, just outside of Ashland. This is a very nice example of a double wide trailer that is maintained very well. It's got a curb, the grass is cut, and so there's a wide range of parks out there, at least in the Richmond region, where we've done most of our research. Right now, there's a lot of construction and design innovations going on in manufactured housing. Most of you are probably aware of tiny homes. Well, tiny homes really are a manufactured home, a mobile home. They just happen to look a little fancier, and they have some A&E shows or HGTV shows about them. And so they've captured the hearts of people who would otherwise eschew traditional mobile homes and manufactured homes. But there's even some really interesting innovations going on in the manufactured home industry today, one of which we'll talk about later, are resident-owned communities to empower folks in these neighborhoods to have a stake in their own community and have a say in how their community is run. But here in Richmond, at least, and in the Richmond region and many parts of Virginia, mobile home parks are filled with people like Augustine here. Augustine is a long-term resident of Mobiletown Mobile Home Park in the south side of the city of Richmond. He's very active in his community. He bands together with residents when there are problems. He's actually a Richmond Memorial Health Fellow right now, so he's learning how to organize his community. He's learning about nonprofits in the community. He is a really motivated, great resident and great citizen. He unfortunately just has a not so great living situation, and he wants to try to do everything he can to improve the living conditions in his park, but there's lots of barriers that are keeping him from doing that. This is one of the problems that he has. Every time it rains, the driveway next to his house in the park floods. He and residents have tried to work with the owner to figure out a way to get him to fix the infrastructure in the park, fix the water and sewer pipes to make sure that this flooding doesn't happen, which when it is very bad can risk his home and threaten his home with mold and decay. So unfortunately, the way that the ownership structure works and the fact that he is not able to build equity in his home and he doesn't really have strong tenant protections, he's left with this situation that is probably not going to get improved unless he and other residents pursue serious legal action, which is kind of a worst case scenario because it's costly and uses a lot of time when he just has a normal day-to-day job. So this is just a little vignette into some of the challenges that our neighbors in mobile home parks have. But let's take a step back a little bit and give you some context for the history of mobile homes and mobile home parks in America. Mobile homes really came about during the baby boom years after World War II, when all sorts of folks were coming back to America. They wanted to sometimes settle down and pick a place to live, but some folks really wanted to just travel the world. This little advertising postcard here says, "Why should I bother about rent and taxation? I can live in a trailer and see the whole nation." There was an American infatuation with traveling the country, seeing the sights, and being able to tow your house or maybe your second home behind your station wagon or behind your truck. And pretty soon, these mobile trailers really became mobile homes and became an option for folks to live permanently in them. And these mobile homes very quickly became immobile homes because folks would just put them down in these travel parks and live there on a semi-permanent or permanent basis. But unfortunately, the housing stock and the trailers being built during this period were really just like RVs. They were not built to last for decades and not built to the same standards that other homes, other stick-built homes were being built to at that time, let alone have the efficiency standards and safety standards that we have in homes today in the 21st century. So the 70s come around, and the mobile home industry really started to mature. They found a niche market. They found really good ways to finance these homes and get people into them. But the federal government came along and said, we need to start regulating these homes. And so in 1976, HUD first promulgated its safety and construction standards for manufactured homes. And those exist still today. There's been revisions and upgrades since the original 1976 regulations, but they tell manufacturers what efficiency standards, what foundation standards, what insulation standards, all of these different homes need to conform to. And so any home that is technically a manufactured home, which is the correct industry term today, not mobile home, any manufactured home has to conform to what is just known as the HUD code, rather than a state or local building code. So that's what makes these homes manufactured. That's how they are produced. Whenever a manufactured home is placed on site, a local building inspector will come and inspect the foundation and make sure that it is installed properly. But the home itself and the interior finishings and the electrical and the plumbing have all been inspected already in the factory, and that all conforms to the HUD code. This differs from a modular home, which is similar. A modular home has pieces produced in a factory, but it is assembled on site and conforms to local state and local building codes, as opposed to a HUD code manufactured home. As you can see in this chart here, most of the deliveries of manufactured homes occurred in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a slight decline when the regulations came into place in the mid 70s, as you can see, but things began to pick back up. And there was a huge boom in manufactured home deliveries in the early 90s. And so most of the housing stock, the manufactured housing stock across Virginia, are these very old 1960s and early 70s units, and then a lot of units from the early 90s, which are in better condition, but some of those even now are reaching the end of their functional lifespan. But the major problem that exists today are these very old, what are known as pre-HUD units that are smaller, less energy efficient, they're not as safe, and they're some of the worst and most dangerous housing stock that we have across the Commonwealth today. And speaking of today, what is our current situation? Well, the industry and the manufacturers have really consolidated. There are just a handful of manufactured home producers and lenders across the country right now. You'll probably recognize Clayton Homes or Fleetwood Homes. You probably see some of their dealerships, just like car dealerships, along major commercial corridors in some parts of the state. And these things are really marketed and sold like cars and RVs and boats. And unfortunately, even though the HUD code really improved the building situation and the standards for some of these homes, they are still kind of built like cars. They have proprietary parts. You can't just go out to Lowe's or Home Depot and get replacement windows for some homes. You have to special order them from manufacturers. And so there's challenges with the way these homes are built and the way they are sold and financed. Unless you can demonstrate that you are putting a manufactured home on land that you own and that you can sign an affidavit with the local court that you will not move the home and you're going to place it on a permanent foundation, you have to title your home as personal property, and it will be treated as personal property by the locality. It may be taxed at a personal property rate as opposed to a real estate tax rate, and you are really only going to have personal property or chattel loan financing available to you. Many traditional lenders still will not make loans for manufactured homes, especially if they are going to be placed in parks where the owners will not own the land underneath them. But at the same time, there are a lot of really good things and innovations happening in this sphere right now across the country. There are some really, really innovative manufacturers that are producing single-wide manufactured homes that are very high quality, very energy efficient. They are, akin to tiny homes that you see on HGTV, but they are produced still in a factory, still with easily sourced parts, but they are really built to last, and they are built to be affordable still to many purchasers. And if you walked into one, you would probably want to get one and have it as your vacation home. Or maybe if you're looking to downsize, you would want it as a great home for you to move into after you retire. And they really don't look anything like or feel anything like the stereotypical mobile home that you might see on Trailer Park Boys, or that you might see in some other show that happens to make fun of mobile home parks and trailer parks in America. But I want to talk a little bit about Rudd's Trailer Park, which if you live in the Richmond region, you may have seen in the news a few years ago, because what happened at Rudd's Trailer Park really was the genesis of the coalition. And this kind of helps set the stage for what the coalition is doing, some of the work that we've done over the past couple years, and what we hope to accomplish in the near future. So Rudd's Trailer Park is on Jeff Davis Highway on Route 1 in the south side part of the city of Richmond. It is a very old park. Many of the units are pre-HUD units that were built in the 60s and 70s. And for a very long time, it's been in very poor condition. It's really a legacy park. So this was a park that was created in the 50s and 60s when many families were traveling up and down Route 1 before Interstate 95 was put into place. And so it was where folks would bring their trailer and hook it up and maybe spend a few nights or a week as they're traveling up and down the East Coast. But fairly quickly, it turned into a permanent mobile home park where folks who were living there lived there on a permanent basis, and it was home, not a place, not an RV park where people would stay for just short periods. For the past decade or so, it has been predominantly low income and predominantly Hispanic Latino. So many first and second generation immigrants from Central American countries that are moving to Richmond actually prefer living in mobile home parks despite their lower quality. They enjoy the fact that they have something that resembles home ownership. It's pseudo home ownership. They may own their unit, but not the land. They want the single family home lifestyle, but they just don't have the income or the resources to buy a traditional stick-built home somewhere in the city. It is, despite being next to some otherwise unwanted land uses and obsolete commercial and retail, it is next to a bus line, and it is within 5-10 minutes of downtown. So it's very close to job opportunities. Unfortunately, back in 2015 and 2016, the city began a code enforcement campaign in an attempt to try to remedy many of the unsafe living conditions in the park. But the city did not go about this in a very equitable manner. The city did not have translators available. The city condemned many homes without working with nonprofits or existing housing agencies to figure out what might happen if that house is condemned. Where would that family go? What are their options? And long story short, there was a fair housing case that was settled between the city and HUD that some local legal aid groups were able to broker, and the city wrote off their code enforcement practices. But many families were displaced, either formally or informally, because they were scared about what was going to happen to the park. In fact, the owner, who had been a negligent owner, but had been very lenient with some of the residents in terms of rent payments, went bankrupt, and the park was forced to be sold at auction. So a new owner has come in and has cleaned up the park a little bit, but the park is really occupied at a much lower rate. And the story from this was that the housing nonprofits and agencies and affordable housing industry and stakeholders in the Richmond region were extremely unprepared for this scenario. Many of the service providers and folks who worked in homelessness never really had mobile home parks on their radar. We didn't really want to touch them. We didn't want to think about them. And like many other people, we thought that they would just kind of go away on their own. But because we had a crisis like this, there needed to be a response. And we quickly realized that there was no coordinated way to handle a crisis to respond to potentially massive displacement when something like this might happen. So a number of nonprofits banded together, and we formed the Manufactured Home Community Coalition of Virginia. This includes homelessness service providers like Commonwealth Catholic Charities and Homeward, our local COC, legal aid groups like Virginia Poverty Law Center and Legal Aid Justice Center, along with some more specific housing nonprofits like Project Homes and our local Habitat affiliate, to try to figure out what to do with these parks. Are they sustainable? Are they something that we want to try to keep around? And we began to ask a lot of questions that we didn't have the answers to. But we knew that we wanted to support families that were living in mobile home parks. Regardless of the housing in general, we wanted to support the people living in them. And we wanted to find a way to preserve them equitably, to give these residents a sense of agency and dignity in one form or another. And so we were asking all these questions, and we really decided that we had to do some homework. There were a lot of things that we didn't know. We knew secondhand that there were some things going on in other states. We knew that some other nonprofits across Virginia were engaged in this work a little bit and had done some thinking about mobile home parks, but they were still pretty much a third rail that many people didn't want to touch. And we didn't have a lot of knowledge to begin to make decisions about these communities. So we began to do some research, and we were able to secure some funding, and we ended up producing a couple of reports and held a symposium here in Richmond on the issue back in November of 2016 that some of you may have actually attended. But the main piece of our work was this large regional study that we undertook back in 2016, where we looked at American Housing Survey data, American Community Survey data, census block level data from 2010 to get down to specific demographic information about parks themselves. And we actually went out and did a windshield survey of nearly every single mobile home park that we could find in the Richmond, Virginia metropolitan statistical area. So it took a lot of time and it took a lot of work, but it was well worth the effort because we really learned a lot. So based on the census data, we figured out that 33,000 people live in over 13,000 manufactured homes across the region. And this includes manufactured homes that are on their own site or on somebody's own land and not necessarily in parks, especially in rural areas. You see a lot of trailer homes and manufactured homes that aren't in mobile home parks. And the housing survey data that we looked at from the census reinforced this hypothesis. In fact, just about a quarter of all of the manufactured homes in the region are in groups of 6 or more, which really kind of constitute a traditional park in some way or another. So 3 out of 4 mobile homes in the region are on their own. But that still means there are many thousands of mobile homes that are in mobile home parks. And these are a very unique type of land and home ownership that have this unique history and unique stereotype associated with them. We were able to find, interestingly enough, with the housing survey data, that almost 3 in 4 mobile homes do not move again after they are placed at their first site. And so the mobile home name is really a misnomer because it takes about $7,000, $8,000, or $9,000 to move a mobile home across town, and that's assuming it's in good condition. Moving older pre-HUD units that are 30, 40 years old is pretty much an impossible task because they are in such poor condition, they will fall apart if you try to move them. And so residents living in these homes in a park that might be closing are not able to move their home to another park, for example. We learned a lot about the demographics of people who live in mobile homes across the region. We learned that overall they're slightly younger than other homeowners. We learned that their income is about half of what other households earn in the region, and the poverty rate for households in mobile homes is twice that of the regional rate. Mobile home residents are on average less white, less Black, but much more Hispanic and Latino than other residents across the region. Over half of all the households in manufactured homes receive a form of government assistance, and about 6%, or certainly fewer than 10% of all householders in manufactured homes have college degrees. So this is a lower educated demographic. So what is the benefit of manufactured homes? The major benefit, and the reason that we're really talking about this today, and that this is even something that we're considering, is that this form of housing is extremely, extremely affordable. The median monthly housing cost for a manufactured home across the Richmond region is about $600, which is less than 2/3 of that for all homes. The median purchase price is less than $30,000, but as I mentioned earlier, this comes with downsides. So this is because it's treated as personal property. There's fewer financing options, but you do have this option to convert it to real estate. That is difficult, and it is impossible if you live in a mobile home park. It's only possible if you also happen to own the land underneath the home. So the interest rates for a lot of these loans are in the 8, 9, 10% range or higher. And because of this, even though this housing is more affordable, on average, more manufactured home residents are cost burdened or pay an unsustainable amount of their income for housing than other households in the region, which means they have less money to pay for food, transportation, medical bills, the other important things that you need to pay for in life in order to thrive. And so despite this housing being affordable, theoretically, at the end of the day, it's actually still kind of unaffordable to the demographic living in these homes. So within parks specifically, in the Richmond region, there's about 5,000 total mobile homes in about 66 parks. There are probably some parks that we couldn't find, but we estimate about 66 that we're able to positively identify. And that's about 11,500 people living in mobile home parks in the Richmond region, which is actually much more than the number of people living in public housing in the city of Richmond. A lot of the housing discussion in Richmond and in other cities is around public housing and what to do with aging public housing stock. But there are many more people living in manufactured home communities across the Richmond region than in public housing, which we found very interesting. So that on its own made us realize that we cannot ignore these communities at all. Most of the parks are in rural areas. There's still about 20 in suburban areas and 16 within core cities in the city of Richmond and the Tri-Cities. And those parks are sometimes very visible, but sometimes they are invisible. They are hidden behind fast food restaurants or car care centers or other commercial and retail places, and you may drive by a park every day without knowing that it's tucked behind another property. We thought that the average household size in parks would be higher than average, and that certainly was the case for some parks, especially in cities. But the park household size is 2.3, which is very close to the average. But the range goes from 1 person per house all the way up to almost 4 people per house. And so the type of family and the type of household is very dependent on the type of park. And we found that the Hispanic population in parks specifically is even more than what it is on average for all manufactured home households across the region. And that there are a lot of children in these parks. 1 in 4 of every human being living in a mobile home park in the Richmond region is under the age of 15. But we wanted to learn not just about the people living in these parks, but also the condition of these communities, what they have to offer, and what the housing stock in these communities look like, and how high quality or low quality was it. So we created a windshield survey. We had limited resources to do this survey, and so it needed to be a little quick and dirty. We wanted to make sure we reached as many parts as we could. So it's a little simplistic, but we thought it was a great starting point for us to really begin to understand what the conditions in all of these parks are. And we were able to visit 54 out of those 66 over a 2-month period back in 2016. And we judged the parks based on their design, their housing quality of the stock itself, any services or amenities in the park, and then what the park was connected to. What kind of community was it in? Was it connected to transportation and retail and things like that? So when looking at design, we looked at sidewalks, which were very rare. We looked at curb and gutter, which was also very rare. Many parks didn't have any street or municipal lighting, and many didn't have any dedicated parking. So you had residents parking on grass or just parking in their yards. And so there was a really lack of master planning with these communities. There are some parks that are very well planned and look like a traditional suburban single-family neighborhood, but many were just kind of created without any regard to design or infrastructure. In terms of the housing quality, we found that about half of the parks had many pre-HUD units, and pre-HUD units are very easy to spot. They are much smaller. The windows are smaller. The cladding is different. They're very, even though you can't know exactly what year they're from, they're pretty easy to find because they're usually in much worse condition as well. A lot of units had poor quality paint and siding that was maybe falling off. We found a fair number of units with broken windows, mainly because there were a lot of vacant units in these parks as well, or in some parks in particular, there were many vacant units. And because some park owners were not providing ample trash service within their parks, there were some cases, or a fair number of cases, where trash and recycling was visible on the ground and not contained in receptacles. Services and amenities in parks were also pretty lacking. Many parks don't have an on-site management. Even parks where there were several hundred units might not have had on-site management, which makes it difficult for residents to pay their rent easily, to take care of other issues that may be going on, and things like that. Many parks didn't have a dedicated recreation field or green space. Many parks also didn't have fire hydrants, which we found very concerning. And despite the prevalence of children in many parks, very few had playgrounds, and even a fewer amount of those had playgrounds that looked at all safe to be on. Parks were also very isolated, especially in rural areas. A lot of parks didn't have any kind of meaningful retail beyond maybe a 7-Eleven within a mile, so they were very disconnected from grocery stores and even just a place like a Walmart or a Target. There were a decent number of parks that were connected to public transit, especially within urban environments, but connection to transit for this population is very important because many are low income, many may not have homes. In Chesterfield and Henrico specifically, there are many disabled persons who are living in parks who cannot drive, and so having a public transit option is critically important to this population. And over half of parks in the region are in food deserts. So we tallied up all these scores, and it wasn't very impressive. So we had, some high standards that we were looking for, and we did find some parks that really exceeded our expectations, but only 9 parks had a score of 50 or higher out of 100. But interestingly enough, the one major trend that we found, and we haven't applied any statistical analysis to this or any testing, but we found this a little interesting, that the larger a park is, if it has over 100 units or so, especially as you get into the parks of 150 or 200 units, their quality greatly increases. It's the medium-sized to lower-sized parks that we found the worst conditions in. And we think this is because many of the larger parks have a larger cash flow, a larger return, and will attract more corporate investors and owners who have the ability to take care of the park in a little better manner than some of the mom and pop operations of smaller parks, which have been passed down through generations, and the owners today may not have the same interest in preserving the park or keeping it up to speed as the previous owners might have. And so these small to medium-sized parks, because they don't have a cash flow that attracts corporate owners, are at a much higher risk of being closed or being sold for redevelopment. But we didn't really want to focus on scoring the parks as much as we wanted to focus on understanding the different types of parks that were across the region. And this was the most helpful framework that we created for moving forward with solutions on preserving parks and thinking about ways to revitalize them, perhaps. And we came up with these 6 distinct typologies because these parks were so different in so many different ways. The first park that we found were the top performers. So these were the highest scoring ones. There were only 7, but they had active management. They had lots of attention to aesthetics and amenities, and the homeowners there had a clear investment in their property. The grass was mowed, landscaping was well done, the homes were in good condition. It looked like, you know, these parks were really great, stable, vibrant neighborhoods. I would have no worries about property values in this park. I would not be afraid to live next to a park like this, even perhaps live in a park like this. There were a few in Hanover, a couple in Chesterfield, and a few other in rural areas. And so these were the ones that we waved the flag on and said, this typology is the gold standard. We know that there are other parks out there that could easily become top performers if they had the right investment and had the right strategies. Another common park that we found were traditional suburban parks. These were slightly lower quality. They had higher unit density. The units were a little bit older, and the amenities weren't quite as nice as the top performers. But overall, these are very stable neighborhoods. They might be kind of large or to medium size, and they are experiencing some development pressures, but overall aren't under huge risk of being redeveloped. But then in suburban areas, and especially in urban commercial core areas and corridors, we found a lot of parks that were under pressure. So they were very tightly packed. They were next to unwanted land uses or next to areas that were being redeveloped and revitalized. These are kind of the legacy parks like Rudd's that we talked about earlier. The units are older, park maintenance has been lacking, and so it would be very easy for a developer or new owner in conjunction with a locality to come to a decision to redevelop the park for a use other than mobile homes. On the other hand, in rural areas, we had small enclaves of units that ranged anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10, all the way up to 50 or 60 units. These parks are less dense. They have probably no management on site, but many of the residents take management and maintenance into their own hands. And we found that a lot of these communities were ad hoc retirement neighborhoods. The populations were older, the households were smaller in size, and so you had lots of people living on retirement income who are not high earners by any stretch of the imagination, but have a stable enough income to take care of their home. And then we found a few parks that were transitional in nature. These were parks that either had or were beginning to take a conventional suburban site design, where they might have expanded and the locality said, the only way that we're going to let you expand is if you go into a new zoning regimen, where the units have to be placed parallel to the roads. the lot sizes have to be larger, the setbacks have to be greater, and you really have to create a more suburban traditional subdivision typology as opposed to the sardine can form of mobile home parks that were designed in the 60s and 70s. And so these parks, because they're undergoing some sort of expansion or revitalization already, there usually is an active management on site. But we are definitely paying attention to see what happens to the older portion of these parks in the future. And then finally, the most common type, unfortunately, were obsolete parks. These were about 1 in 4 of all the parks that we visited, where the infrastructure, the homes themselves, and the management and any amenities that there were had significant problems. And any type of revitalization would require huge subsidies and a huge effort to really transform these communities. But these are the places that deserve the most attention because they are some of the, again, the worst housing conditions and worst housing stock that we have in the Commonwealth of Virginia today. The major takeaway from all of this is that there is no stereotypical mobile home park. There are plenty that are super stable and vibrant and great communities, but there are also just as many, if not more, that deserve serious attention, not only to the community itself, but the residents living there. And speaking of community, that's what it all boiled down to. So the pictures here are of residents in Southwood Mobile Home Park, which is right outside of Charlottesville. Southwood has been owned by the Charlottesville Habitat affiliate for a number of years now. That nonprofit purchased the park to stabilize it, and they have been working with the residents for over 10 years now to figure out ways to redevelop the park in an equitable way that's led by residents so that at the end of the day, Habitat can step away and turn the park over to the residents to maintain and potentially even own in some fashion. And the major reason, or one of the major reasons that we're looking at preserving these parks is that even the ones or the parks that are in super good condition all the way down to the parks that are in very poor condition, no matter what incomes people are earning, no matter what conditions their homes are in, each one has a very tight, strong bond. The residents are in it together. They really enjoy the style of housing and having their own home, even if they don't own the land underneath it. They like having neighbors nearby, but they like the privacy of having their own unit that they can call home. And they just want it to be improved, and they want to build strong communities, but it's tough to do that. So real quickly, what are some of the challenges that we have and that we face as we begin to think about accomplishing our mission as a coalition to support these families? First of all, we really have to start with the home and the unit itself. Despite the fact that we have, there are strong HUD requirements and guidelines in place now, that doesn't exactly mean that today's manufacturers are going above and beyond that. They are pumping out some good units, but it's really up to smaller shops, smaller nonprofits that are really innovating and producing high quality homes. These are some more pictures of the homes I showed you earlier in the webinar. These are from Palm Canyon Mobile Club in Palm Springs, California. So some very good architects have come together and building engineers to create a home based on the traditional single wide dimensions of a manufactured home built today, but they've really focused on opening up this this design to have more windows to flow more freely, to really blend the open, the outside space and the inside space to create a larger living area. The finishes are very nice and high quality, and it really would help somebody feel proud of their home and not feel like it's a burden on them. Maintenance is very easy, energy costs are very low, and it's an attractive looking design. And we think that there's no reason why the manufactured homes being built today can't be high quality, can't be built like traditional homes, and at the same time remain affordable to the people who want to live in these homes or may need to buy a smaller home because they have a lower income. The other big piece of the puzzle is the community and the neighborhood itself. As I've alluded to, many of the owners today of mobile home parks are at best sometimes negligent or just absentee, and at worst exploitative of the residents. Mobile home park residents in Virginia do not have very strong protections under state law. They do not have the right to many affirmative rights to organize. They do not have the right to know when a park might get sold. They do have the right to know when a park might be changed in use. But even then, they don't have much time required under law to be able to find new places to live if their park is going to be sold and redeveloped. But there are some nonprofits working in Virginia, including Habitat for Humanity and, on the right, Catholics for Charities, that have purchased mobile home parks and are working with residents to figure out a more equitable way to run the park and to stabilize it and revitalize it and fix some of the serious issues that might exist in the park to make sure that the residents have a healthy, safe, and thriving place to live. Outside of Virginia, the national best practice that we really want to bring to the Commonwealth are resident-owned communities. There is a national organization called ROC USA, Resident-Owned Communities USA, based in Vermont that partners with state organizations, statewide nonprofits and alliances to help residents of parks organize, perhaps create their own nonprofit or resident association, and then figure out ways to accumulate capital and financing structures to purchase the park themselves and operate it as a co-op, or basically, a condo, except instead of the condos being stacked on one another in a traditional building, they're spread out over a park. But the residents have a say in how the park is run. The residents have equity, not just in their homes, but also in the land underneath their homes. And we feel like moving forward, this is the best way to equitably preserve and revitalize parks across Virginia. So the coalition is looking to partner with ROC USA to bring this model to Virginia in the coming years. But even if we're able to create a high quality home and we're able to create a structure for long-term sustainability and equity of park ownership, we still need lenders to provide high quality financing for buyers who want to purchase this kind of housing. And as I mentioned earlier, many of the loan products available today for residents living in parks who might want to replace their unit are not high quality. They are just like a car loan, 10, 15-year terms, and very high interest rates. And many of them are financed through the dealers, which can sometimes be exploitative because they're not regulated the same way that traditional lenders and banks are. So one example of an innovation in this is VHDA and USDA partnering here in Virginia to offer rural home buyers with a way to purchase on very favorable terms slightly used manufactured homes, even ones that may have been sitting on the dealer's lot for more than 12 months but are otherwise brand new, give them very favorable terms that are guaranteed by VHDA and USDA to get buyers into manufactured homes when they otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a home at all, perhaps. Right now, this program is available only to buyers who also own the land underneath their home, but there are models that USDA Rural Development provides in Vermont and other states that allow buyers to access some government-backed loans from USDA in parks. And those are really only available if the parks are owned by nonprofits or resident-owned. And so it's all kind of connected together. We have to do these things simultaneously and in conjunction with each other to create a brighter, more equitable future for mobile home residents. And then finally, as evidenced by the pop quiz at the beginning, we need to expand public engagement and education to try to get rid of these unhelpful stereotypes that still exist for for mobile home parks and manufactured home communities. So this is another photo from the symposium we held back in 2016 when we revealed the results of that survey that I mentioned earlier, and had some panels of residents and some national folks who are working in resident-owned communities and new high-quality manufactured housing to teach land use officials, elected officials, planners, lenders, basically anybody connected to this industry at all to understand that there is a better future out there if we are intentional about creating it. So why does all this matter as we're wrapping up here with 5 minutes to go? Well, all of you are probably aware that the nation overall has serious housing issues, especially for low and moderate income households. Housing prices are going up overall, but incomes are staying the same or going up just just a little bit. In the Richmond region, where we call home, we need to build over 15,000 new affordable homes to people of low and moderate income over the next decade, at least. Building affordable homes is very difficult. There's a lot of government programs and subsidy that go into it. It's worth it at the end of the day, but it still requires a lot of effort. And we have limited resources to do it. The average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in the Richmond region is a little over $1,000, which is way more than what a manufactured home would go for on a monthly basis. And it would take about 20 bucks an hour to earn the wage you need to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in the Richmond region. And there's still lots of people out there that have steady full-time work that are earning just half that. And so what can we do about these challenges? Well, we need to keep in mind that manufactured homes and manufactured home communities are the single largest source of unsubsidized, meaning that there's no government subsidy going into this at all. For the most part, manufactured homes are not subsidized in their financing or their lending by government entities, whether at the federal or state or local level. So this is entirely a free market solution, quote unquote, to some of our housing challenges. Manufactured homes are the largest unsubsidized source of affordable housing in the country. And we cannot forget this and we cannot ignore it, but we have to flip the script a little bit to try to make it equitable and work for the people who are living in this housing. Because home really is the foundation for every other part of our life. It's tied into wealth building, education, health, both your mental and physical health, financial stability, job stability, your safety, and your comfort. So if we can make manufactured housing work, then we can help provide a much better foundation for the many thousands of people living in mobile home parks across the Richmond region and across the country. So that's pretty much all I have, but I do want to end with a second poll question to try to gauge your feelings on this topic after an hour of listening to me ramble about this. So we'll give you a few seconds to see whether or not, knowing what you know now, if mobile home communities should be part of the housing options that are made available in your community. All right, well, my job is done. Thank you so much, everyone. I am really glad that you all are thinking this way. Keep in mind that there are some huge challenges that lie ahead for this. It's very complicated work. There's a huge web of policy barriers and financing barriers ahead of us, but part of overcoming those barriers is doing things like this, educating people like you, and I'm happy to continue the conversation in other ways. And if you will be at the APA conference in July, please corner me and maybe buy me a drink, and I'm happy to talk to you about manufactured housing for as long as you would like. So I know we've got a few minutes left, and with Sarah's help, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have now.
Yes, so we have a few. So let's go through these. We will Just let me know if you need to stop, but if not, we'll just go through all of them. The first one is kind of a two-part question from Joe, saying the state code 58.13522 states manufactured homes installed according to the uniform statewide building code shall be assessed at the same time as assessment of the real property on which the manufactured home is installed. Such homes shall be assessed in the same manner and using the same methods applied to improvements in buildings. If that's the case, why does the finance industry apply such a high rate? And then clarifies, although manufactured home falls under personal property section of state tax code, they are to be assessed in the same manner and rate as a stick-built home.
Right. So the first part of the question, that's definitely true, and that is the case for nearly every manufactured home that is situated on land that the homeowner also owns, which again is the lion's share of manufactured housing that exists in Virginia. And so those homes are assessed by the locality when they are placed on a permanent foundation and adhere to all of the building code guidelines as real estate and are assessed that way. They do not, that doesn't mean that they appreciate in the same way that traditional stick-built homes do. They don't lose their value as much when they are placed on a permanent foundation, and unless you kind of know what one looks like, if you're driving by, you would just think that it might be a rancher home. So that's all well and good, but the main problem is in the parks themselves, because many of the older units do not meet those codes the way that they were originally placed on a foundation, if they're lucky to even have something that resembles a foundation. And the fact that the owner is not able to own the land underneath, the locality is not able to, the title is still a personal property title. That title hasn't been transferred to real estate with the locality, so it's still with the DMV, and it's still personal property. And in Virginia, you are not able, if you live in a park, to convert your title to real estate. Other states, you can do this. There are some hoops you have to jump through and certain requirements the park has to meet. For example, it's possible in Vermont and other states to have a house, a mobile home in real estate if there's a long-term lease, like a 99-year lease, with the park owner, which is generally a nonprofit or a resident association. So in that case, you can have the home treated as real estate, and lenders are a little bit more comfortable to touch them at that point. I'm not super familiar with just the overall financing world or the details of it right now, but most traditional lenders are still hesitant to touch manufactured housing for concerns about appreciation, even if it is titled properly and it's on land that the owner owns. There's still a pretty big concern among lenders that a mobile home, a manufactured home will depreciate in value. And I think that's kind of the holdup. And it's just very easy for dealers to offer a very quick and attractive loan to buyers when they come in the front door of a dealership. And just like car dealerships, they are very good salespersons and are able to steer folks to those options rather than encourage buyers to really try to convince lenders to lend on that product. So that's something that we're doing more research on, and there are resources out there. So if you'd like me to dig up some more papers or articles on that, send me an email, and I'm happy to help answer more questions about the financing.
Okay. Next question from Tan is, are the modern mobile homes still taxed as personal property?
When they are in parks, for the most part, my understanding is yes. But as referenced in the previous question, most localities, I believe, will treat manufactured homes, even if they are titled as personal property, will tax them at the real estate rate, which is good. Obviously, that's a much lower tax rate for most localities, and it's less of a financial burden on the residents. But I have not been able to find out to be able to generalize if localities in the Richmond region tax units in parks at the real estate or the personal property rate. It may be on a case-to-case basis. And we've also discovered that many residents in parks also think that they own their home, but they actually don't have title because the previous person, the previous resident, and claimed that they then took ownership of the unit when in fact they didn't, and then quote unquote sold that unit to somebody else, but actually did not transfer the title. And so there's a huge web of title and ownership issues in a lot of older parks, especially where owners have sometimes been unscrupulous about evictions and sales to new tenants.
Alrighty. Next question is from Paul. What are the opportunities to use manufactured homes as accessory dwelling units? I may have missed this earlier. What is the typical cost and range of a 600 square foot, 1-bedroom manufactured home?
The typical cost for a small manufactured home, which would kind of fit the form of a accessory dwelling unit, can range anywhere from I'm kind of spitballing here, but $20,000 to $50,000, depending on the quality and the finishes. You could easily build one that is more expensive than that, but it would not be hard to build one that is pretty inexpensive. I don't know if any traditional manufacturers right now are building units specifically as accessory dwelling units. Most of the form really is a single wide, kind of elongated rectangle shape as opposed to a more kind of traditional footprint. But I'm sure there are some out there that would work. I would be very interested to know, and maybe you land use experts and zoning administrators out there, if you're still paying attention, would know whether or not any provisions in your zoning ordinance that allow for accessory dwelling units would allow for a manufactured home to be used as one, or if the zoning requires it to be stick built. That's a very interesting question, because I think using manufactured homes as accessory dwelling units has huge potential, especially in suburban areas where the lots are large enough to support something like that. So that's definitely a policy solution that we would want to look more into.
Okay. Next question from Vaughn. Have you been able to determine what kind of redevelopment the smaller, less viable mobile home parks might attract? Is there a common zoning in place for these properties?
As far as we can tell, most parks in the Richmond region, at least, have some sort of grandfathered mobile home park zoning classification associated with it. In Chesterfield, for example, and if somebody from Chesterfield is on the webinar, please correct me if I'm wrong, most, if not all, of the parks remain zoned are MHP or something similar, or MH1 or MH2. But those zoning classifications have been mothballed, and so any park that is that might experience that might be sold would have a change in use, and so you're not able to build any new mobile home parks now. And so the redevelopment potential for non-mobile home uses really kind of depends on the context of the surroundings. It could just be bulldozed, and traditional stick-built homes could be built on them if there's huge residential demand in certain areas, especially if that's really all the surrounding zoning might allow, if it's more traditional suburban. But along a lot of the major commercial corridors in urban and suburban areas, the redevelopment pressure really is mixed use and commercial for new strip mall or office uses. And that's where a lot of the threatened parks are. and that's what's been happening with them in Virginia. For small parks, specifically, the redevelopment opportunity, I think, really is stabilization via nonprofit ownership or ownership of some other kind of benevolent organization. Small parks are very, very hard to turn into resident-owned communities because it's just harder for 6 or 8 or even 20 residents to kind of have the be able to band together financially and support a transaction like that. So really would take a nonprofit partner to come in and purchase the park and operate it just like they would another multifamily site that they might have that they run as affordable housing. So that's the solution that we would encourage.
Okay. Last question is from Jessica. When calculating housing costs as a percentage of household income to determine whether a household is burdened by housing costs, is that cost just the rent/mortgage, or does it include other costs like water, sewer, electricity, gas, and HOAs?
The way that the census calculates that, and the way that we usually use it is mortgage or mortgage principal or rent if you rent, plus basic utilities. So the things that you kind of need in order to live in your home. So electricity, whatever you use for heat and cooling, gas, things like that. It does not include HOA fees. It will not include cable and internet or things like that. It's pretty much your basic housing costs.
Alrighty. Well, that was it for questions. Thank you for sticking with us, everybody. And I guess last but not least, Jonathan, did you want to share about Housing X before we sign off?
Sure, yeah. So real quickly, the coalition's website is up there. So that's the site that you can visit to view the full reports and information up there. And Sarah should be sharing these along with the full webinar recording, obviously. But one of the other organizations that I'm lucky to work for is Housing Virginia, which many of you are probably aware of. It's much more well known than the Manufactured Home Coalition. Our big signature event this year will be Housing X, which is a day-long unconference, we're calling it, on May 22nd. So coming up in exactly a month, actually, at the Convention Center here in Richmond. We're going to be showcasing all types of innovations in affordable housing, including shipping containers and other manufactured housing related innovations. We're going to have virtual reality, housing tours, and all sorts of other really interesting stuff. We're going to have speakers from all over talking about crazy things going on in housing. There will be a reception afterwards, and most importantly for everybody watching today, we were just able to get many of the sessions to count for CM credit. So if you would like more of those, you can attend the day, and I'm not sure what the total is that you would be able to receive. Sarah, you may know since you're involved in this as well, but we'll be sending the information and registration links out for that conference, and we certainly encourage any and all of you to join us on May 22nd and learn about innovations in affordable housing.
Thank you. Yes, APA Virginia is excited to partner with Housing Virginia on this to make it more accessible to planners. I know off the top of my head, at least 4 of the sessions have been certified and hopefully a few more to come. So it will definitely be of benefit to those AICP, FAICP planners. If you're in the Richmond area, it's super convenient. It's also a great day trip, and there's plenty to see in Richmond. So we hope to see you there. And just look out for my follow-up email, which Jonathan said will have his presentation, links to Housing X, and how to sign up for next month's webinar on May 20th. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Jonathan, for giving us your time today. That was a great presentation, and thanks everyone for sticking with us during your lunch hour. Hope you have a great rest of your day.